She didn't move when he slid the bill toward her. That was the part nobody at the table expected. Gabrielle Celeste was 29 years old and had spent years learning to make borrowed things look entirely like hers. The dress, the table, the room, the name she was building inside it. She was a visual image consultant who had made careers for labels that didn't know who they were yet. She had composed campaigns that made Paris call Seoul to ask who the creative director was. She was brilliant, precise, and completely invisible to the man beside her, except as something to display. His name was Evan Whitmore, and he had brought her to the Moon Orchid for a reason he had not told her. He had a table full of investors and an ex-fiancée, watching from the center seat. He had 2 bottles of champagne already on the bill, and he had a plan, rehearsed down to the gesture of sliding the silver tray across the white tablecloth directly in front of her. Just loud enough for the right people to hear. Let's see if our independent princess can cover at least part of the evening. The number on the bill was not in her account. He knew that. He had always known that. This was not a test she could pass. It was a mechanism designed to make her fail publicly. In front of the people who mattered. In a room she had no business being in, unless someone like him had brought her. She reached for her clutch. Her hands did not shake, and from the private section of the restaurant, without raising his voice, without moving from his chair, a man said 4 words that changed the entire architecture of the night. The bill goes to me. His name was Kang Dae-hyun, officially the chairman of a hospitality group, unofficially the man whose name made people in certain industries adjust their behavior without being asked. He had a crane tattoo on the right side of his neck and eyes that registered everything without appearing to watch. He had seen the entire evening from where he was sitting, and he had seen exactly what Evan Whitmore was trying to do. What no one at that table knew, including Gabrielle, was that Kang had been watching her work for 6 months, and that the dinner Evan thought was his trap was about to become something neither of them had planned for. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a member and help our channel. The first table on the left had a couple arguing in whispers. The second had a man alone with a glass of wine he hadn't touched. Gabrielle Celeste noticed both before she noticed the chandelier. The Moon Orchid was the kind of place where people came to perform restraint. The ceiling was high enough to absorb sound. The tables were spaced far enough apart that a conversation could remain private without effort. The menus carried no prices on the version given to guests who had not asked for them. Gabrielle had been given one without prices. She set it down without reading it. She had spent 6 weeks in this relationship learning the geometry of rooms like this one. How close to lean in, how often to speak. Which opinions to hold back, because the cost of offering them was higher than she was prepared to pay on a Tuesday night. She was good at reading environments. It was, literally, her profession. And she had read Evan Whitmore clearly enough, early enough, to know that what he offered and what he asked in return were not yet balanced. She stayed anyway. She stayed because the relationship opened certain doors, and she hated knowing that about herself, but she knew it, so she stayed. Evan was already at the table when she arrived. She was 7 minutes early because he had told her to be 12 minutes early. And she had compromised the way she always compromised with him. Not fully. Not in a way he could call out, but enough that the edge of the original request still pressed against her wrist. He was seated beside a man named Hargrove, whose cufflinks probably cost more than her last 3 invoices combined, and beside him sat a woman that Gabrielle recognized before she had been introduced. Madison Vale. She had done her research. She always did her research. Madison was seated at the exact midpoint of the table, with the particular stillness of a woman who has already decided the evening will go a specific way and is simply waiting for the rest of the room to confirm it. She held her champagne glass the way trained people hold things, without grip, as if the object had arrived in her hand, and she had simply agreed not to put it down. Evan stood when he saw Gabrielle and kissed her cheek and placed one hand on the small of her back. The gesture was practiced and proprietary. She felt it land and felt herself receive it the way she received all of his touch. Present, aware of what it communicated to the room. Aware that it communicated it without asking her permission. "There she is," he said. To the table, she sat down. The dress had come from Sylvie Beaumont, a thank you after the campaign. After Gabrielle had spent 4 months building the visual identity for Maison SB's debut collection, which had put Korean and Black models together in a series of images so precisely composed that 3 European publications had called Paris to ask who the creative director was. Sylvie had pulled the dress from a storage rack and held it against the light. White, beige, silk, and crepe. Crystalline embellishments sewn in clusters along the neckline and hem. Not flashy, not decorated, but catching light in the way that real craft catches light. Quietly, and from unexpected angles. "You'll outshine the room," Sylvie had said. "I'm borrowing it," Gabrielle had said. "I know. That's the point." Gabrielle had not told Evan the dress was borrowed, not because she was ashamed of it, because she had learned that certain kinds of information, once given to certain kinds of people, became weapons without announcement. The table was 10 people. Old money on the right side, the kind that speaks quietly about things it owns, and never uses the word investment in polite company. New money on the left, wearing itself conspicuously and asking about bottle service at a place that didn't have it. Madison Vale in the center, and Evan at the head, where he had placed himself by arriving first. And selecting the chair, Gabrielle spent the first 15 minutes doing what she was professionally trained to do in unfamiliar rooms. Listening more than speaking. Locating the currents, identifying who deferred to whom and over what. She asked Hargrove one question about a Korean sculptor she had genuinely studied. An artist whose work she had considered for a client brief the previous year. And Hargrove answered with the condescension of a man who had not expected to be questioned, and had not particularly enjoyed it. Evan watched that exchange with a calibration she recognized. "Gabrielle has good instincts for aesthetic things," he said when Hargrove finished. "She works in fashion. Events, image consulting." He said it the way someone describes a hobby that a person near them has developed to fill time. She had been building brands for 5 years. She had 4 labels in growth, and one on the verge of its first major international placement. She said nothing. The champagne arrived. 2 bottles. Unrequest. Evan had ordered them before she came in. He made a toast. She heard the surface of but not the interior. Because she was watching Madison's eyes move from Evan to Gabrielle, and back to Evan with a frequency that looked like calculation wearing patience. When the table moved to art, a topic Evan typically treated as a social instrument rather than a genuine interest, Gabrielle spoke. She had been at the Frieze preview that spring. She had an actual opinion about the sculptor, whose installation had dominated the conversation among the people who attended events like Frieze, to see rather than to be seen. She began to articulate it, not forcefully, not to perform expertise, simply to participate in the conversations Evan had said he was bringing her to. And Evan turned toward her with a smile that had arrived from somewhere ahead of what she was saying, already prepared, already dressed. "She's lovely," he said to the table. "But I didn't bring her here to lecture everyone." 2 people laughed. One person looked at his plate. Madison Vale's expression did not change. Gabrielle stopped speaking. She lifted her water glass, set it down, kept her spine exactly as it had been. She had spent 29 years learning to receive a blow without letting anyone in the room watch her feel it. because women who showed pain in rooms like this one learned quickly that the pain became the story instead of the cause. And she was not willing to let Evan's cruelty become her scene. The conversation moved. A deal in commercial real estate on Evan's left, a fund structure from Hargrove, a low exchange between Evan and Madison that produced a laugh from him that lived entirely between the two of them, with a wall on all four sides. Gabrielle did not lean in to hear it. She watched the door. She watched the waiter refill her glass. She watched the chandelier scatter light across the tablecloth nicks in irregular leather. Intervals. As though it were trying to resolve something geometrically and kept arriving at the wrong answer. Then the sommelier brought the bill, not the full bill. A partial account for the 2 bottles Evan had ordered before she arrived. The tray landed at the center of the table on brushed silver. Evan looked at it, and then, with the deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed a gesture enough times that it looks spontaneous, he slid the tray toward her. Not a shove, a measured, even, considered glide. "Let's see," he said. "If our independent princess can cover at least part of the evening." The table heard it. He had made sure of that. Gabrielle looked at the number. She didn't need to look twice. The figure on the tray was not in her account. Evan knew this. He knew it because he had asked questions in the early weeks of their relationship that had seemed like interest and were actually inventory. He knew precisely what she had. He knew precisely what this moment would cost her. This was not a test she could pass. It was an apparatus. Constructed to make her fail, publicly, with witnesses who mattered, in a way she could not argue with later, without sounding like she was making excuses for not being able to afford a restaurant she had no business being in. Either she paid and emptied herself, or she refused and confirmed every silent assessment. Madison's eyes had been running on her all evening. Her hands did not shake. She had spent enough years performing composure that her hands had internalized the instruction. She reached for her ivory satin clutch and unclasped it with one motion. And that's the sound of a woman who had decided something before the decision was entirely formed. "The bill goes to my table." The voice came from the private section to their left. It did not raise. It did not perform. It arrived the way the voice of a man arrives when he has spent decades making rooms listen to him without asking. Gabrielle looked up. He was seated at a table. The restaurant appeared to have arranged itself around, slightly apart from the main floor, in a section that had its own light and its own silence, as if it had been designed for someone who required the room without requiring attention. He was Korean, in his mid-50s. A black suit tailored with the precision of something made to disappear into formality, and still be quietly the most exact thing in the room. Hair silver at the temples, short, worn back, cheekbones sharp enough to catch the light the chandelier was throwing, eyes that were watching her. Not Evan, not the tray, not the table, her. With the particular quality of attention that means someone has been watching long enough to have already formed a position. On the right side of his neck, a black ink crane in flight, wings half spread, lines clean and old, in the Korean style, not decoration, not accent, the kind of mark that carries meaning only people with specific knowledge understand. Evan had gone the color of expensive paper. He knew the name. Everyone at the table knew the name, including Gabrielle, who had heard it at the periphery of events and in the notes of industry conversations about who actually owned what in this city. Kang Dae-hyun. He still did not look at Evan. He looked at Gabrielle. A black card appeared from the inside of his jacket. Jerome Park. The stocky Korean-American man in charcoal and wire-rimmed glasses, who had been seated beside him without any visible function, received it and passed it to the approaching waiter with a single movement and no instruction. None was needed. "The entire table's bill," Kang said. Evan opened his mouth. "Small men," Kang said, finally directing his gaze at him, "always call their cruelty a joke when someone else is watching." The restaurant had not gone silent. The restaurant had always been quiet, but something in the texture of that quiet changed, the way the texture of air changes just before weather arrives. Gabrielle sat with her clutch open in her lap, and her hands still, and did not move. No one had ever said that sentence in a room like this one. No one had ever aimed it at Evan Whitmore, in front of people who owed him something. The sentence landed not as rescue, but as clarity. A light turned on in a room she had been navigating by feel. And the thing she saw when the light came on was the exact shape of what she had been in for 6 months. She closed her clutch. She kept her spine exactly as it was, and she waited. 2 of Evan's friends left within 20 minutes. Not loudly, not with incident. They simply folded their napkins, said they had early mornings, and did not meet Evan's eyes when they said it. Hargrove stayed, because Hargrove owed Evan's family a covenant that predated the evening and would outlast it, and because men like Hargrove had survived decades of social turbulence by treating every room as a thing to be endured rather than engaged. Madison Vale stayed too. Gabrielle noticed this. Evan attempted to right the table through volume. He made conversation with the energy of someone filling a room that was already deciding it was somewhere else. His voice was louder than it needed to be. He laughed at things that weren't funny. Madison watched him with the expression of a woman who had been through this before, and understood that the performance would exhaust itself before she had to do anything. Gabrielle said almost nothing for the remainder of the dinner. This was not fear. It was attention. The specific attention she brought to rooms she was studying for professional purposes. The one that saw how power distributed itself, who moved it, and who absorbed it, and who went home with it at the end of the night. Kang Dae-hyun returned to his meal. He did not look at their table again. His right-hand man, Jerome Park, did not look at their table again. They ate with the unhurried pace of men who had closed a matter and moved on. Gabrielle watched Kang eat. She tried to understand what had just happened and could not yet. Not entirely. She knew his name. She knew the dimensions of what his name signified in this city. She knew that the crane tattoo on his neck was not worn by men who needed the authority it conveyed. It was worn by men who had already demonstrated what it meant in rooms that were no longer standing. She knew that Evan's pallor had not resolved, that under the performed recovery, he was still the color of a man who had miscalculated badly in front of the wrong audience. And she knew, with the particular clarity that arrives in the body before the mind has caught up, that the cost of the evening had not been what Evan had attempted to make her pay. The cost would be Evan's. She didn't know yet what form it would take. She didn't know yet what Kang Dae-hyun wanted from the intervention, if he wanted anything at all. She didn't know that he had been watching her work for 6 months, or that he had a proposition that had nothing to do with the restaurant and everything to do with a gala and a dress and a room full of women who had exactly what she had just survived, multiplied by years. She only knew that when she finally stood to leave, she stood the way she had stood when she came in. Straight, measured. The dress catching the chandelier light along the crystalline clusters at the hem. And no one in the room who had watched the evening unfold could have said with certainty whether she had been the woman who was humiliated or the woman who had seen through something. She was almost at the door when she heard a voice behind her. Miss Celeste. She turned. Kang Dae-hyun was standing at the periphery of the dining room, jacket buttoned, hands at his sides. Jerome Park, a precise 3 steps behind him. He had the posture of someone who had decided to say something and had already decided what it would be. I didn't pay because I thought you couldn't, he said. I paid because no one at that table deserved to keep buying your silence. Gabrielle looked at him. I know your work, he said. The Beaumont campaign, the image you built for that brand. I saw what you made and I know how you made it. He paused. One pause measured. I'd like to discuss something. if you're willing." She studied his face for the thing men put there when they mean something other than what they're saying. She had become very good at finding it. She did not find it when, she said, he produced a card, plain, matte black, a number in silver, and extended it without fanfare. "Tomorrow," he said, "if it works for you." She took the card. She put it in her clutch. She nodded once. She walked out. Behind her, through the glass, Evan Whitmore was watching. He had seen the card. He did not understand yet what it meant. But he understood it meant something. And he could feel, with the animal instinct of a man who had spent his life using access as currency, that the current had shifted in a direction he had not intended to shift it. The night air outside, the moon orchid was cold and clean, and Gabrielle stood in it for exactly 4 seconds before she hailed a cab. She did not look back. The coffee at Kang Dae-hyun's office arrived before Gabrielle did, which meant someone had tracked her cab. She filed that detail the same way she filed all details about rooms she was entering for the first time. Quietly, without reacting, placed somewhere she could retrieve it later. The office was not what she had expected. It was on the 32nd floor of a building that held 3 of his hotels, and it looked like a room where a man conducted his public business rather than his actual one. Tasteful, sparse, the kind of neutral that requires careful selection. A wide desk in pale wood, a window that faced the water, one painting, oil on canvas, of a mountain in the Korean style, not decorative, precise. The kind of thing someone buys because it means something. Kang was standing at the window when she arrived. He turned when she came in and gestured toward the chairs in front of the desk without sitting behind it himself. He sat across from her. Gabrielle sat. She had worn her own clothes today, her own shoes. She had decided that deliberately. "The Beaumont campaign," he said. "The image you built for that label. I want to know how you conceptualized it." This was not what she had expected either. She told him. She told him about the brief. Sylvie's instruction had been minimal. Make it look like us. She told him about the 6 weeks of research she'd done before touching a mood board, the conversations she'd had with the models about who they were and what they brought to the room, rather than how to compose them into a picture. The deliberate choice to make the images feel like documentation rather than construction. As if someone had simply walked in and caught these women being themselves in a space that was already theirs. Kang listened. He did not interrupt. He did not perform listening. He simply did it with the specific quality of attention that belongs to people who are genuinely interested in how other people think. When she finished, he asked 2 questions, both precise, both about process, not result. Then he told her about the Silken Crown Gala, an annual charity event, he explained, that he and 3 other investors had been reshaping over the past 2 years. It raised funds for an organization that worked with women rebuilding after financially abusive relationships, forced abandonment, and public humiliation. The last category he mentioned without emphasis, but Gabrielle registered it. The event was scheduled for 11 weeks out. The creative director position was vacant. "The person I had," he said, "left the project in March. I've looked at 4 replacements. None of them understood what the event is supposed to do." "What is it supposed to do?" Gabrielle asked. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been waiting for that exact question. "Make the women in that room feel like the event was built for them," he said. "Not for the people who bought the tables." Gabrielle was quiet for a moment. "That's a different brief than most galas," she said. "That's why I haven't filled the position." She asked about the contract. He described the terms: formal agreement, market rate, her own team, full creative autonomy within a budget she would set. No approval process beyond a single brief alignment meeting at the start. She asked why he was offering it to her specifically, now, after one conversation at a restaurant exit. "I've been watching your work for 6 months," he said. "I knew who you were before last night. Last night I learned who you were when you were losing. "What did you learn?" she said. "That you don't perform pain," he said, "and that you don't perform recovery. You simply stay." He paused. "That is the quality I need for this event." She looked at the painting above his obelisk for 3 seconds. "I'll review the brief," she said. "That's all I'm asking," he said. She stood. He stood. He did not extend his hand first. He waited to see if she would, and she did, and they shook once briefly. She picked up her bag. At the door, she stopped. "Why last night?" she said. "Specifically." He thought about this for a moment. Not the answer she could tell he already had. He was deciding whether to give it to her directly. "Because I've seen what happens," he said, "when men like him are not interrupted." Gabrielle nodded. She opened the door. She took the brief home that evening and read it in 3 hours and did not sleep until she had filled the first 11 pages of a new project notebook. She called Evan to end the relationship at 7 the following morning. He was not awake. She left the message, anyway. She kept it short. She did not explain herself. He called back twice. She did not answer either time. The project notebook had 15 pages by noon. The first thing Gabrielle did when she accepted the commission was call Sylvie. She needed 3 things: a production contact for garment fabrication, a recommendation for an event lighting designer who worked in emotional register rather than spectacle, and a second opinion on the central installations concept. She had sketched in the notebook at 2 in the morning, which was either the strongest idea she'd ever had or the kind of idea that only makes sense before sunrise. Sylvie said after a pause. "It's both." "That's not helpful," Gabrielle said. "It's accurate," Sylvie said. The concept was this. At the center of the Silken Crown Gala's main room, a long dining table set as if for a formal event, empty plates, crystal glasses, silverware, but not complete. Some of the plates cracked, some of the glasses broken and left in place, and along the table, in place of menu cards or place cards, paper notes bearing phrases, real phrases. Documented words used by men to diminish women at events exactly like this one. The notes would be anonymous, assembled from testimonials, collected through the organization the gala supported. The table would be the negative image of an elegant evening. The shadow cast by rooms like the Moon Orchid, made visible, made public, placed at the center of the most expensive table in the city. At the back of the room, the dresses. 12 gowns, each in a different silhouette, in a spectrum from white to gold to deep charcoal, each representing a woman who had been seen as ornament and returned as author. The final gown, the last in the sequence, the most visible, would be Gabrielle's own dress, the borrowed, white beige Beaumont piece, rebuilt, the shimmer reinforced, the hemline lengthened, the construction reworked from delicate to structural. She would wear it. She explained this to Sylvie over the phone at 8 in the morning, and the line went quiet for 4 seconds. "I need to be the one who reconstructs it," Sylvie said finally. "I was going to ask you," Gabrielle said. "Good," Sylvie said. "Come in Thursday." The work was the kind that consumed her the right way, the way real projects consumed her, from the inside out, from the center rather than the edges. She built the team. She hired the lighting designer Sylvie recommended. She brought in a fabrication consultant for the installation table. She had weekly calls with the gala's organization director, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had rebuilt her own professional life after a public and financially devastating divorce, and who listened to Gabrielle's brief with the expression of someone recognizing something. "This is the event I've been trying to make for 4 years, Patricia said. "I know," Gabrielle said. "That's why I took the job." Evan's response began quietly, the way his cruelties always began, a call to a mutual industry contact. A stylist who worked the same events Gabrielle worked, asking casually whether there were any concerns about the Silken Crown appointment, phrasing it as due diligence. Mentioning the restaurant incident without context, the way you mention something you're pretending not to be using. The stylist called Gabrielle to tell her She thanked him and filed it. A week later, the blind item appeared. Industry newsletter, widely read, anonymous source. It described, without names, a well-connected, creative professional who had leveraged a controversial restaurant encounter with a Korean businessman to secure a significant charity event appointment. The language was careful enough to avoid legal exposure and explicit enough to be unmistakable to anyone inside the industry who knew the players. Gabrielle read it at her desk at 10 in the morning, set her coffee down, and went back to work. But 3 days later, a patron withdrew. Then a second, then a third. A fashion house, whose participation she'd been counting on for the garment installation. Her business partner Dina called at 6 in the evening with the specific tone of someone managing her own fear while managing someone else's. "We need to talk about the timeline," Dina said. "The timeline is fine," Gabrielle said. "The funding window is..." "I know the funding window. I built the funding window." She paused. "What are you asking me?" Dina was quiet. "Whether we should pause," she said finally. "Until the..." "No," Gabrielle said. "Gabrielle, no, we don't pause." She ended the call and sat in her studio at 11:30 at night, looking at the design boards she had built over the past 3 weeks. The table installation, the 12 dresses, the lighting map, which she had drawn herself because it was the only way to communicate what she meant, the notes. She had 141 of them now, sourced from testimonials, each one a sentence a woman had heard in a room she had tried to be enough for. She read them for 2 hours. She almost called Kang. She had his number, not the black card number, but the office line Jerome Park had given her for project logistics. She almost called to tell him that the funding was shifting, and that the project might be in danger, and that Evan Whitmore was operating in the margins of everything she was trying to build. She didn't call. She opened a new page in the notebook instead. She wrote at the top, "What does this event exist to do?" She wrote the answer, which she already knew, and had simply needed the 2 in the morning to hear again. Then she closed the notebook. She went home. She slept 5 hours. She came back at 7 in the morning and started making calls. Sylvie called at 9 on a Thursday morning with the voice of someone who has been holding something and decided it had been held long enough. "I need to show you something," she said. "Can you come to the studio?" Gabrielle was there within the hour. Sylvie's studio smelled like fabric sizing and coffee and the specific productive disorder of someone who thinks best when surrounded by controlled chaos. She was standing at a work table when Gabrielle came in, and on the work table was a phone, screen up, with an email thread open. "Read from the bottom," Sylvie said. Gabrielle read. The first email was from Evan Whitmore's personal address. She recognized it from months of correspondence, addressed to Sylvie's father, Edouard Beaumont, dated 6 weeks before the night at the Moon Orchid. It was written in the register of a man performing courtesy for a specific purpose. It described Gabrielle's consultancy in terms that were technically accurate and contextually corrosive, noting her emerging reputation, her project-based income structure, her relatively limited experience with events of a certain scale. It then noted, delicately, that the Beaumont family's endorsement of her work might be premature. Given the scale of opportunities being associated with her name, it was not a threat. It was a whisper, the kind made in carpeted rooms, using vocabulary that can't be quoted out of context. There were 4 more emails. Each one a careful escalation of the same position, tracking Edouard Beaumont's non-response with the persistence of a man who was not accustomed to being ignored. The final email, sent 2 days before the dinner at the Moon Orchid, contained the words, "I understand Sylvie may have her own perspective. I'd encourage you to consider the longer-term implications of the association." Gabrielle put the phone down on the work table. She was quiet for a long time. "He tried to get your father to pull your endorsement," she said. "My father forwarded it to me the day he received it," Sylvie said. "I told him to ignore it." Edouard is many things. He's not a coward. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were in the relationship and I didn't know what you would do with the information. And because I was waiting. Sylvie folded her arms. I wanted to see what he would do next. When the restaurant happened, and then the blind item, I stopped waiting. Gabrielle looked at the emails again. They were dated, signed, and sent from an account registered to Evan Whitmore personally. They were not forwarded gossip or second-hand account. They were documentation of a man systematically attempting to corrupt a professional endorsement because the woman who would benefit from it was moving toward opportunities to dance he had decided she should not have. The humiliation at the restaurant was not his opening move. It was his contingency. I want copies, Gabrielle said. Already sent, Sylvie said. Gabrielle took a breath. She thought about the call she could make. To the event journalists who had run the blind item, to the industry contacts Evan had worked through, to the specific platforms where this kind of documentation moved through conversations and produced consequences. She thought about what it would look like. Her name attached to a public exposure, her narrative, defined by the battle rather than the work. She put her phone in her bag. I know what I'm going to do with them, she said. What? Sylvie said. Not this, Gabrielle said. Not publicly. She went home. She spent 2 hours composing a single document, a factual summary of events, with the emails attached, addressed to the chairs of the 2 cultural boards Evan sat on. No demands. No ultimatums. No request for action. Simply, the documentation, a note confirming its authenticity, and the observation that the conduct it described might be relevant to the organization's governance standards. She sent it at 4 in the afternoon. She heard nothing back for 11 days. On the 12th day, Dana called to tell her that the 3 patrons who had withdrawn had been replaced by 4 new ones. On the 14th day, she received a call from a board member at one of the institutions she had written to, who said only, "We appreciate you bringing this to our attention." The call lasted 2 minutes. Evan Whitmore's name was mentioned once. Gabrielle thanked the board member and ended the call. She returned to the gala. There were 4 weeks left. She had a table to build, 12 dresses to install, and a lighting map to execute. She had 141 notes to arrange along a surface. She had a reconstructed dress waiting in Sylvie's studio, its shimmer reinforced and its hemline lengthened, and its structure rebuilt from delicate to something that could hold the weight of a room. She had work to do. The Silken Crown Gala opened on a Thursday evening in November. Gabrielle was in the building at noon, not to supervise. Her team had been living in the space for 36 hours and knew it well enough to run it without her watching. But because she had learned early in her career that the final hours before an event were not for logistics. They were for listening. She walked the room alone for 40 minutes, listened to it. The way the ceiling caught sound, the way the light in the installation table changed as the afternoon angles shifted, the way the 12 dresses moved very slightly in the ventilation that came through the ceiling vents, not dramatically, not performatively. Just the small, continuous movement of fabric and air, the way living things move. She stood at the installation table and read the notes. 141 sentences. Real ones, sourced, and gathered over 8 weeks from women who had submitted them through the organization's intake process, anonymously, without knowing. They would become the centerpiece of a room that would hold 400 people, and the better part of the city's cultural and financial infrastructure for one evening. She had arranged them herself. She had read all of them at least 3 times. Each time, she had felt the specific weight of recognition, the feeling of a sentence that someone else wrote about their life that also describes yours, and the particular loneliness and company of that. The broken glasses were arranged in 3 clusters along the table's length. The cracked plates held each their card. The silverware was laid correctly, formally, as if the table were about to be sat at. She adjusted one card. Then she left the room. The evening arrived the way evenings do, when you have spent months building toward them. Faster than expected, and exactly on schedule. Kang Dae-hyun arrived at 8 quietly, with Jerome Park and 2 other men she didn't know. He did not seek her out. He found his table, the one at the back of the room, where the view of the entire space was unobstructed, and he sat in it with the same presence he had occupied at the Moon Orchid. Slightly apart, contained, watching. She saw him from across the room when she came in. He saw her. He nodded once. She nodded back. The room filled. The Foundation's donors, the fashion and arts community, Gabrielle had spent weeks building into an audience. The women from the organization's network who had been given tables at the front of the room as a deliberate inversion of the usual seating logic. The people the event was for, closest to the work. The installation landed. She had been afraid that it might read as heavy-handed. She had been afraid that the notes might feel performative. She watched the room's response from the entrance, and what she saw was not what she had feared. She watched a woman in her 50s read one of the cards and stand very still for a long time. She watched 2 women at a table lean toward each other and speak quietly, one taking the other's hand. She watched a journalist she recognized take out a phone and photograph the table from 3 angles without staging the shot. She watched a man in a good suit read a card and look at his companion with the specific expression of him, a man who has understood something he did not understand before. The 12 dresses stood at the back. When Gabrielle walked out wearing the rebuilt white beige dress, the hem lengthened to the floor, the crystalline embellishments reinforced and extended along the sleeves. The structure recut so that what had been delicate was now deliberate. The room gave her a reception she had not prepared herself for, not applause at first. A quiet. The specific quality of quiet that means a room is processing something simultaneously. Then the applause. She stood at the center of it and received it the way she had learned to receive things. This fully present without making herself smaller, without performing gratitude that would minimize the moment. She had built this. She accepted the room's recognition of that. In the back, Kang Dae-hyun was sitting with his hands folded on the table. He was not applauding. He was watching with the expression she had seen on his face the first night. Not approval, not sentiment, simply the quality of attention a person gives to something they have been waiting to see confirmed. She looked at him once, across the room. He looked back. He nodded. She turned back to the room. At the far right table, she could see Evan Whitmore had come because he could not resist, because the professional circles he occupied had made it impossible to avoid. Without a visibility that would have said more than his presence, he was seated with 2 people she didn't recognize, and he was watching her the way a man watches something he tried to prevent that happened anyway. Hot. With a particular combination of bitterness and recognition that has no name because it is its own unique category of loss. She did not look at him again. After the event, when most of the room had moved to the reception floor, and the installation was being photographed by 3 publications, Patricia Holt found Gabrielle at the entrance to the main room and embraced her without speaking first. They stood like that for a moment. "This is what I meant," Patricia said. "I know," Gabrielle said. A journalist she had worked with before found her 20 minutes later and asked, on record, who had supported her when things became difficult. She gave him Sylvie's name, and Patricia's, and the names of every woman on her team. She gave him the name of the lighting designer and the fabrication consultant. He asked if anyone had stepped in to protect her when the project was under threat. "But he protected me," she said. "Someone interrupted the mechanism long enough for me to see clearly. The rest was work." He wrote it down. Kang Dae-hyun left before the reception ended. He did not come to find her. She had not expected him to. She had understood, from the first conversation in his office, that he was not a man who needed to occupy the center of things he had put into motion. She received a message from Jerome Park at 11:30 that evening. 3 words. Well done. She read it twice and put her phone away. The moon orchid in February was quieter than in November. The season turned the city inward, and the restaurants that served the people who moved between social obligations rather than inside them became, in winter, the province of smaller parties and longer dinners. Gabrielle arrived at 8 on a Tuesday evening. The maitre d' recognized her before she gave her name. He had been there in November. He led her to a table near the window. Not the table from before, a different one, but one that looked out at the same city the other had faced. She ordered water. She opened her project notebook. The notebook was the 4th in 12 months. The first 2 she had filled during the gala project. The 3rd she had started the week after, when 3 new commissions arrived within 10 days of each other, including one from a cultural foundation in Seoul that had seen the Silken Crown coverage and wanted to discuss a year-long visual identity engagement. The 4th notebook was newer. The pages she had filled so far were for a project she was calling the one that scared her, which was always the sign that it was the right one. She ordered a second glass of water. She wrote for 40 minutes. She paused once to look up at the room and at the chandelier, and at the table too, sections over where she had sat in November, which was occupied now by a party of 6 she didn't recognize, having a dinner that appeared, from this distance, to be perfectly ordinary. She looked at it for a moment and then looked away. She turned a new page in the notebook. A waiter appeared and asked, quietly, whether she would be ordering. She said yes, she thought she would, and asked him what he recommended. He told her she ordered it. She thanked him. She wrote, "If you want to go deeper into this world, our Patreon community is the extension of this channel. Extra sagas, bonus chapters, no ads. Link below. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever built something real? A reputation, a career, a version of yourself, and watched someone try to reduce it to how you looked in a room? Have you ever stayed somewhere because the door it opened felt more important than the cost of walking through it? And when someone finally interrupted the mechanism that was working against you, was it enough to see clearly? Or you still have to do the work of getting back up yourself? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all, and if you believe in stories about dignity, recognition, and women who rebuild on their own terms, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.